It was once the sidearm of choice for American soldiers standing tall on distant battlefields. It even became the icon of a generation that prized big-bore firepower over everything else. But why is something so historically beloved now being treated like a worthless ancient relic in today's polymer-filled world? In this video, we'll talk about 5 reasons. People say the 1911 is now obsolete, and we'll have plenty of fun poking at those who only ever carried a Glock or SIG P365 as we go along. Now, before anyone starts furiously typing in the comments, I'm not hating on your personal carry choice or your right to keep and bear arms. We're here to explore the so-called flaws of the 1911 through the eyes of self-proclaimed tactical experts who think a polymer-framed pistol is the only way to survive a zombie outbreak, alien invasion, or any other Tuesday afternoon, apparently. So let's see what these folks have to say about why the 1911 has had its day, and whether they might just be guilty of a little over-the-top exaggeration. A common accusation is that the 1911 weighs about as much as a sledgehammer. Critics claim you'll tilt off balance if you carry one on your hip. According to them, you might as well start preparing to buy new pants a size larger because your belt's going to sag right off the bat. Yes, there's no denying the 1911 is heavier than most polymer handguns. After all, it has a steel frame, an honest-to-goodness forged hunk of metal that could probably be used as a boat anchor if you were in a pinch. But is that automatically a bad thing? Let's consider what we actually gain from that added weight. The old adage says, heavier guns shoot softer. That means felt recoil is often more manageable with a steel-framed pistol than with a super light polymer gun. While your buddy, who only carries a pocket rocket, might be nursing a sore wrist after a range trip, you'll be steadily drilling holes in the bullseye with your old-school .45, thanks in part to that heavier frame soaking up recoil. So yes, it is heavier. But that heft doesn't just vanish into the netherworld of negatives. It's working to give you stability, consistent follow-up shots, and maybe a bit of old-world charm. Now, do we all want to lug around a full-size 1911 in the dog days of summer? Maybe not. But guess what? They make aluminum-framed versions, commander sizes, officer sizes, and even polymer hybrid versions. All of a sudden, the weight difference compared to your average Glock starts to shrink. The reality is that if weight was the only factor that made a gun obsolete, we'd have to toss out an entire category of steel or alloy firearms. And that's just not happening. Sure, the 1911 is not the leanest gun on the market, but your daily carry routine is about compromise. Would you rather have a slightly heavier gun that helps with recoil and points naturally, or a featherweight that bounces around in your grip? The 1911 might not be the ideal choice for that 5K run you're training for, but it's hardly the giant unwieldy brick that some modern polymer enthusiasts claim. Probably the second most common gripe you hear is, 7 or 8 rounds of 45 ACP? That's it. My P365X macro is the size of a Pop-Tart and holds 17 rounds of 9mm. Well, that's definitely a fair point on the surface. Higher capacity can be a huge advantage in certain situations. The general consensus in the tactical world is that more is better, right? After all, you never know when you might be attacked by a whole mob of ninjas at the gas station. Yet, the dreaded 7+1 or 8+1 capacity is only the standard for a traditional government-spec 1911. Since the dawn of time, or at least since the 1970s, the custom crowd has offered extended magazines, and there's a whole new class of double-stack 1911S, often referred to as 2011S, that carry 10, 12, or even 14+ rounds, depending on the caliber. Suddenly, the capacity argument loses some steam when you realize that there are 1911 pattern pistols with capacity pushing beyond your standard full-size 9mm. Of course, the common retort is that you're still dealing with a bigger, heavier platform, so capacity alone doesn't make it modern. But it's not like you're limited to exactly 8 rounds and no more. Furthermore, consider that many people actually prefer the standard 7+1 or 8+1 arrangement. They like the slimness of a single-stack magazine, the more comfortable grip, and the reduced bulk for inside-the-waistband carry. There's a reason a 1911 can feel so ergonomic in your hand. The single-stack design, while lower in capacity, often fits people's hands quite nicely, and that is a requirement for accuracy and comfort. For someone who's proficient with their 1911, a lower round count might not be the disadvantage it's hyped up to be. And if more ammo is required, well, that's what spare magazines are for. Another common point you'll hear from gun snobs is that a 1911 with its external hammer, single-action trigger, and manual safeties is so grandpa's gun. We have striker-fired guns now with no external safeties to slow us down, shouts the modern polymer enthusiast. Who wants to flick off a safety before shooting? That's like using dial-up internet. The claim is that if you're not on the striker-fired bandwagon, you're a dinosaur hopelessly trapped in the early 1900s. But hold on, hammer-fired guns, particularly single-action only, like the 1911, are prized for their crisp, short trigger pulls, which contribute to better accuracy. That's a feature, not a bug. Many top-tier competition shooters prefer the 1911 or 2011 platform precisely because the single-action trigger is consistently good. And let's not ignore the fact that a good DASA or even an SAO like the 1911 can be recocked if you have a light strike, whereas with most striker-fired guns, you need to re-rack the slide to try again. Yes, it's true that there's a learning curve when you carry a 1911 cocked and locked. You have to train to disengage the thumb safety on your draw. But guess what? That's a skill you build. You don't complain about having to press the brake pedal in your car, do you? The 1911's external hammer and manual safety aren't relics. They're proven design choices that have worked for over a century. And for some, they inspire extra confidence. You can see a clear indicator of the weapon's status, both by the hammer and the safety lever. The polymer-only crowd might say that safeties and hammers complicate matters and that modern is simpler. That's a preference, really, not an objective truth about superiority. Striker-fired guns can be plenty safe, and hammer-fired guns can be quick and efficient if you practice. Each design has trade-offs, so calling the 1911 obsolete because it's a hammer gun oversimplifies the conversation. If the Army is still issuing some 1911s in specialized roles and countless law enforcement and competition shooters use them, maybe there's a reason these ancient hammer-fired beasts haven't gone extinct. One of the more interesting criticisms thrown at the 1911 is that it's finicky or unreliable. You'll hear folks say, "I bought one from a bargain basement brand, slapped on random parts from the internet, and it jams every other round." Then they'll conclude that all 1911s jam, ignoring the possibility that maybe a gun that cost $400 with zero quality control might not run like a Swiss watch. Yes, the 1911 design is over 100 years old. Yes, it's a bit more precise in its tolerances than certain looser-fitting polymer guns, meaning it can need a break-in or a bit of lubrication. But if you take a quality 1911 from a reputable manufacturer, shoot decent ammo, and maintain it properly, guess what? It'll run just fine. Look at how many times you've seen high-level competition shooters running 1911 or 2011 platforms, dumping thousands of rounds without a hiccup. Are they sending them in for repairs every match? Hardly. The reality is that some older designs might require more TLC, and some 1911s out there were made cheaply or out of spec. That creates the myth that the gun's inherent design is flawed. Meanwhile, polymer guns can also fail if they aren't fed the right ammo or if they're poorly made knockoffs. Yet you won't hear a striker-fired purist mention it. They'll say, "That's just another Glock clone." Well, not every 1911 brand is created equal either. So is the 1911 truly outclassed by modern designs and reliability? Sure, you might argue that some polymer pistols tolerate neglect better, especially in extreme environments. But for everyday use, if you take care of your firearm, a well-made 1911 is about as reliable as a well-made anything else. Finally, we reach the cost issue. Why would anyone spend $1,000 or more on a pistol that's over a century old in design when you can buy a polymer-framed wonder gun for a fraction of that? The premise here is that new equals better value. If we're purely measuring specs on paper, capacity, weight, cost, the 1911 often loses. But is that the full picture? To be fair, the more basic 1911 models can indeed cost as much or more than many polymer pistols. And custom or semi-custom, 1911s can quickly shoot up into the multiple thousands of dollars range. That can be off-putting if you're used to seeing Glocks priced a few $100s less. But that extra money often goes toward craftsmanship. A well-made 1911 might have hand-fitted parts, polished feed ramps, and a trigger that feels like a glass rod snapping. These details matter to a lot of enthusiasts. It's not just about raw functionality. Sometimes it's about pride of ownership, tradition, and the tangible quality of steel and wood or G10 grips in your hand. That said, if your main concern is, I just need a firearm that works, you can grab a dependable polymer pistol at a lower price point. Absolutely. No argument there. But calling the 1911 obsolete just because it's pricier is like saying a nice mechanical watch is obsolete compared to a cheap digital watch. Sure, they both tell time, but some people enjoy paying more for something that feels special, that stood the test of time, and that might even become an heirloom. Plus, if you compare apples to apples, there are budget-friendly 1911-style handguns out there that run really well, like the Ermox XP Pro, the Bursa M2XI, or the EAA Witness 2311 Match X. These have been proven to go bang reliably, and they won't break the bank. So the cost factor can be as high or as moderate as you want, depending on brand and features. The freedom of choice is a beautiful thing in the gun world. Now that we've taken a look at the top 5 reasons the 1911 is often labeled obsolete, let's circle back to an earlier question. Is it truly a fossil of the firearms world, or is it still relevant in an era dominated by polymer frames and high-capacity 9mm mag dumps? Clearly the market doesn't think so. After more than a century, the 1911 remains in production from dozens of manufacturers, used by competition shooters, law enforcement and some military units, and concealed carriers who prize its ergonomics, trigger, and aesthetics. Heck, I've seen 7 or 8 brand new 1911-style handguns released in the last couple of months. We featured them in one of our videos where we covered SHOT Show 2025. The notion that it's only for grandpas or FUDs misses the reality that plenty of well-informed shooters still choose a 1911, despite, or perhaps because of, its old-school roots. On the other hand, if you're a dedicated Glock 19 fanboy or a P365 snob, more power to you. The important thing is that we all have the right to choose what suits our needs best. The bigger question is, why do so many folks seem determined to bury the 1911 for good? Is it fear that something old might still outperform their spiffy new carry piece? Or is it simply a comedic tradition to mock things that are historically significant? Maybe it's a bit of both, but let's be honest. In an age where technological progress moves quickly, sometimes having a proven, battle-tested design can be comforting. And let's not forget the intangible factor called cool. The 1911 silhouette and mystique have shaped American firearms culture for generations. At the end of the day, calling the 1911 obsolete may be trendy among certain folks, but that term doesn't quite apply to a platform that remains relevant, customizable, and adored by shooters around the globe. After all, classics never really die. They just get rebarreled, reblued, and carried for another 100 years. So whether you're Team 1911 or Team I only know how to field strip a Glock, there's room for all kinds in the great American gun community. Let's keep it that way. When you think about it, that's one other thing the Second Amendment stands for: the freedom to choose what works best for you. Heavy steel, polymer frames, or anything in between. And as for the 1911 being obsolete, well, you decide. Maybe it's time to actually shoot one and find out for yourself. If this video was helpful in any way, or if it just gave you a good chuckle, please like, share, subscribe, and click that bell icon for more of these videos. Thanks for watching.